conversations around change give you one of two options. Change could be about fixing something that's broken, or it could be about charging towards a vision of something better. But what if the problem was a different kind of problem? And what if it needed the entire system to invert? That's what the third view is about. I'm Mansi, and with me are Eric and Jana, co-authors of If Not This Then What, a book about radical systems change. And in every episode, we're going to take something complex, break it down into its fundamental building blocks, or what we call essences, and explore the question of what becomes possible when these essences invert. We published an essay last week arguing that Trump's chaos is actually not random. Most people are trying to understand him through one of two lenses. Either, like previous presidents, he is incrementally fixing what's broken, and that's confusing because that's obviously not working, or he is charging towards this grand vision of MAGA, whatever that is. We think both of these lenses are missing what's actually happening. What Trump is doing is a third thing, which is that he's systematically inverting the load-bearing essences of the current reality. He's not moving in any direction in particular, but he is dismantling the architecture of the existing reality. And every action that looks erratic follows the same logic. Take what the current reality depends on and fundamentally change it. Change all of it and change it all at once. The essay maps which of these essences are being inverted and asks what becomes possible in the space that he's creating. That's what we're going to build on today. We kick off by asking Eric why he thought about writing about Trump in the first place. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
When Trump sort of came on the rise, I decided to take a subscription to the New York Times to read the news from people close to him. And it struck me, let's say, over the years that he was in his first presidency, that there were quite a few articles in the New York Times where the journalists would say, so how is it possible he's doing all these things for so long, not one of them damaging him? It's really strange. I think they were honestly flabbergasted.
And that was only his first term.
Yeah, it was only the first term. I think now it's even more clear because at the time, as it is said, a lot he was driving sort of with the handbrakes on. People around him trying to say, these are the norms and you have to respect this and that. And now he just doesn't. Well, I think we have to acknowledge that at the time when he was driving with the handbrake on, it worked, and now it works very well, and there are no handbrakes. So it works better. So I think from that you can see if you do just everything differently, but then really everything, it actually works. The handbrake period was less successful, or he was achieving less than he is achieving today.
The insight would be that he's more effective because he's kind of inverting what we have called the load-bearing essences. Not one, not three, but more and more and more, right? And in that sense, it's kind of, that's really counterintuitive, right? So usually people change one or two things. And if someone would suggest, hey, we might change more, then I don't know. Most people will say, no. Let's take it easy. Let's see how this works out first. But actually, then the statement is that by inverting more, it works better in that sense, right?
Now, I recall when I was working in Philips, we did a strategy project, and it was sort of hosted by Bain Consultants, and they had a book and they made me read the book, and the book had sort of 4 essences of a business, and they said in any big change you can only change 3. and by now I know 3 is not nearly the beginning. You have to change them all if you really want something different.
Yeah. So one question that comes from there, Eric, you said he's being much more effective now that the handbrakes are off and he's trying to really change everything. What is effective? Because in the article we've talked about it's directionless and it's just moving away from the current reality. So what do you mean by effective?
Nou ja, so my answer is just his progress. And the progress, I think if I had to measure it, is in distance from the old reality. And let's just look at this weekend. There were no King's demonstrations. Millions of people in the US, in so many cities, I believe in every state, in all the major cities. And I think it's recognized we really have a different world now. I mean, we have a different world in the Middle East. We have a different world with North Korea, with Russia, Venezuela, Mexico, the EU, NATO. I mean, imagine you are 83 years old. Are you going to do all those things? Never ever. I mean, you have to admire that. And many times when people are discussing change, implicitly in how they look at it, they judge it. But I think if you, in this case, don't judge it and just notice the distance he's taking from a world that he did not like, let's call it the Biden and the Obama world, he just did not like those worlds. So he said, I don't want that. And he doesn't know what he does want. He just wants the biggest distance he can get, and he changes bloody everything. And it's in that sense, it's very effective. And I think the distance is getting bigger by the day.
But then, so I agree that the distance is really huge, right? I mean, and that's a total break from what we have seen before, people trying to change a country for the better. But then, as it seems to be directionless, right? We say that it's not that he is moving towards a fixed point. He's more moving away from a fixed point, right? That's the analogy that we should take here. It's kind of making up space. But of course, the trouble is that the space has to fill up at some point in time, right? And that's of course where it's going to be, well, interesting, maybe tricky, because we better be prepared that we need to somehow fill up this space. And Trump is not going to do it. I guess he's only going to make more space. But who are the ones that are going to fill up this space? That's then the actual question, right?
But in this period where he is inverting all of these essences and doing all of these things that are completely opposite of what used to be done, why do things still sort of hold and move? It feels like he's getting his way. Is that normal? And eventually, if he's not to get his way, if we need to get to the end point where it's not Trump's ideal reality, then how do we get to that point?
I would say that for him, the ideal reality is performing this change, right? Making sure this change happens. I think that is his reality. Now, you can only do that for so long, but I think for him, I think that change itself is the reality he wants, and he's doing that indeed pretty effectively.
I wonder if that's true, though. In a way, a lot of the things that he seems to have done it feels like are the beginning points of a reality that he wants to build. For example, well, maybe not domestically, but the Board of Peace, for example, what is an attempt to build a different reality from the UN. Installing himself as the interim president of Venezuela is an element of the reality that he sees coming up. Changing the names to Gulf of America, those are things that seem to be elements of the reality that he wants to build up. So, do you really think he doesn't have an endpoint in mind, and this flux is actually what he's going for?
No, I mean, if I try to read his latest actions, so Iran was a way to change again everything, right? And then when that's not working out, he will think of something else to get the attention to that change again. And maybe that's also the kind of effectiveness that many of his voters are seeking. I mean, there are a lot of people on the street today, but obviously there are also a lot of people not on the street today. But I think coming back to your earlier question, like, so he's very, very effective, but it's not that the whole United States of America has collapsed, right? So he can be changing a lot, but not everybody is changing a lot, right? If you're in I don't know, in some job somewhere, I think most of those people are still doing what they did. And you will not change that overnight, right? That always takes a lot of time.
So it's almost like you're saying he's changing the things that he is able to change, but then of course the way that change trickles down into people's everyday lives is it takes longer, it's probably much more difficult and more drawn out. But until it reaches the people to the extent that they change, things don't necessarily fall apart, and definitely not all at once. It's more of a sort of cascade instead of everything is destroyed all at once.
Yeah, I would say so. A system of inertia, basically.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and for a large part, I feel the same way. So when you voted for him, you also voted for all kinds of things that you did not want. And in the beginning, it doesn't hurt you. It's a don't care. And then at one point, it starts to affect you as well.
For listeners who are unfamiliar with our work, the don't care is a concept from our book which describes a feature of any reality that is initially too small or too insignificant to really care about. But as the reality scales or as time passes, that don't care scales with it, and eventually it inverts into a do care. And what that means is the do care needs to be addressed, which can only be done through the inversion of the old reality into a new, radically different reality. Every reality has a don't care essence. In business, it might be an externality, or as in the case we're discussing here, it could be something that is just too inconvenient to deal with, and so you don't until the problem scales, and then you're forced to. Now back to the conversation.
And in the beginning, it doesn't hurt you. It's a don't care. And then at one point, it starts to affect you as well. Like, for instance, people at the airports, things that should be with the government, they are in the market. And healthcare is ridiculously expensive, and schooling is ridiculously expensive. At one point, it's gonna hurt you, and then I think they will find out that ultimately, let's say, people, I think he doesn't care. They are not there for the people, and gradually, I think the No Kings thing this weekend is a sort of a first step into people starting to realize that they are the big don't care, and at the point where they become a do care for Trump, then his whole thing will fall over.
It reminds me of the discussions around neoliberalism and how it's essentially the don't care of neoliberalism, not just Trump, was the people, that the government should be completely restrained and should not play any big role in society, and that don't care is obviously becoming a do care. Trump is, let's say, the epitome of that, it seems.
Yeah, I think so.
So indeed, if the people are the don't care, then that will only invert when enough people, when enough communities get together and say, okay, now this is enough.
It needs to be a do care. Yeah.
And in that sense, I immediately think of the French Revolution then. And then at some point in time, there wasn't any king anymore.
No, yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, you could argue it's the same across like any history where the elite become excessive. The don't cares, which were always the people, start inverting into a do care. As elitism, I guess, becomes excessive, whether it was indeed the French Revolution or pretty much any kingdom anywhere in the world.
And I see like America is changing a lot already, but there was an article this weekend, also in the New York Times, about the space race. It's not between Russia and the US. No, it's between Musk and, what's the other guy? Bezos. It's two guys. This used to be massive countries. It's really different.
Actually, this is a nice segue to the next question that I thought we would explore, which is, We've talked about agency in the article. We've said that that's actually what the space gives us. But you've just pointed to the fact that there are certain people that are more than willing and perhaps even able, given their resources, to fill that space, like Bezos, like Musk, and so on. So I guess the question is, how do you grab that agency? And of course it has to be collective effort, like we've discussed in the previous segment, but these things can often take decades. We've talked about, for example, Switzerland and Iceland and their types of democracies, and they also took decades to sort of emerge as the solution. How do you reclaim agency then? Because there are people already able, willing, and have the resources to fill in that gap very quickly.
Okay, it's always, I realize it's easy sitting in the room here, having to think about only this question and giving a single answer that is free of consequences. But still, Trump has an issue with NATO. He says he wants to kill it. Of course, it's politics and it's power play. But I noticed that Rutte, the chief of the NATO, he's desperately trying to cling on to, let's say, the old situation. I think if we're discussing agency, it's possible to imagine a world without NATO. Of course, why wouldn't it be? And I think, if you would consider that world, given a lot of things that have a major change already, and you think it through, on so what could be an answer on the side of Europe, of course it is possible to come up with something. I certainly think it's possible.
I think there are already signs of that, right? It could be a group of countries that just states, hey, we think this is important, like helping out Ukraine against Russia, for instance. It's not a NATO in that sense, a NATO restricted effort, right? Yeah, that's indeed the perfect example of it used to be only through NATO. Now it can be more, and it can be flexible groups of countries acting together, right? And in that sense, I think that's also the pluriformity of Europe. It really can fit with that pluriformity, right? And so in that sense, and there's enough that unites European countries and also countries around Europe to do that. So there are multiple options. So in that sense, indeed, if NATO, well, maybe collapsing is a little blunt, but if it's going to be less important, then others will take their place. But I do agree that it's more easy said than done to take agency, especially for individuals, right? But it's also the kind of thinking that we do together, and the opinion pieces in the newspaper that influence the public opinion, and it's in that sense discussing different opportunities in a nuanced way. That's also agency.
Yeah, instead of wallowing in the why is this happening, at least you
Yeah,
start thinking, and then little by little, maybe more people join you in your thinking, and that's how you basically start a movement, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, yeah, that sounds a bit fluffy, but of course, the many opportunities can arise in this space, right? So you better talk with as much people as you can about this, because all these perspectives will shed some light on what can start to happen there.
Yeah.
In that sense, maybe agency is just being prepared for what could come, and then if something comes along, then support it, right? And make it grow in that sense.
Right. Yeah. At least already start thinking of possible solution directions. So whenever something presents itself, you can recognize it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also thinking, you brought up NATO, and yeah, in a way, Spain's reaction to not helping in the Iran war is quite a break from the old reality as well, prompted by Trump, of course. But nevertheless, it shows that indeed NATO, which was previously a rigid, restrictive sort of organization, could indeed become more fluid, and different countries within NATO or outside of NATO form their own sort of alliances for specific purposes and then dissolve them and then regroup for another purpose that could well be a world that exists in the new reality.
But I notice what I said about Rutte, and it's easy to criticize from here, but he's trying to keep it like it was. And the fact is, it is not. So that just doesn't help. And it's, Rutte is just trying to do his wheeling and dealing with Trump, not getting into a fight, trying to avoid. But in the long run, it's not going to help because he's not moving along with a reality that's really changing. And I think is disappointing. He also has the opportunity to say, okay, everything is changing big time. Maybe they're doing it. Of course, I could be not aware, whatever, but I never read anything about it. So what is the strategic thinking we can do if everything changes? But then let's really also think big change, yeah? Not the smallest possible, but the biggest one. And then how would that look? And is there opportunity there? Things that we could do.
But that actually points to what we've touched upon in the article, that Mark Rutte seems to be clinging on to this old reality, just like I think many of us are clinging on to our idea of the previous world. Just the idea of NATO not being around feels insecure, even though maybe the new reality that emerges with fluid alliances that are much more purposeful might be an objectively quote unquote better reality. It just feels difficult to accept. And of course, Mark Rutte himself, that's his job. His job was to keep NATO from falling apart, and in a way that position was created to cling on to the old reality.
Yes, I think that's usually the case, right? I mean, these big organizations, they're not going to change by themselves. Most organizations, only very few big organizations really change by themselves. Voluntarily, involuntary, that's a different story. So in that sense, I think there's nothing new there. You could say that NATO is also just a set of promises, basically, right? And now these promises are in that sense tested. So you could also say in our wording, maybe the promises that NATO is built on were just a dogma and they weren't tested, really.
Another side note for listeners that haven't had a chance to read our book, a dogma is an essence that is so fundamentally true to a specific reality that people stop questioning it altogether. It draws from the English meaning of dogma, but in our framework, it's a fundamental building block of that reality. And if that dogma, for whatever reason, stops being valid, then the entire reality could start inverting as a result of this dogma inverting. So a dogma would invert from a do care to a don't care, from being a fundamental foundational truth of a specific reality to being absolutely unimportant and actually invalid in the new one. Back to the conversation.
You could say that NATO is also just a set of promises, basically, right? And now these promises are in that sense tested. So you could also say in our wording, maybe the promises that NATO is built on were just a dogma and they weren't tested, really, right? In that sense, it's also the sheer number of powerful countries that believed in those promises that it would kind of last. But was it actually tested? I'm not sure. Now, all the things with Greenland, we didn't touch Greenland, of course. That was another one.
There's another one.
Of course, that immediately was like, I mean, and I guess that people in NATO are very glad that it's not on the agenda anymore, but that would have been a test, right? Not saying we should test NATO, certainly not, but it's just the remark that it wasn't tested, and in that sense, what are we clinging on to? That you could say that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a NATO member looking at NATO territory. So you can say the promises could also be lies. So, and I think the opportunity to do it is there.
Yeah.
We just don't do it. I think if there would be no NATO, we had to. So in that sense, it's better if there's no NATO. We accept, okay, it's a disaster, forget it, it's over, it was good for a while, it's not good anymore, we need to reorganize, and let's do it. Yeah?
Okay. Any last thoughts or ideas, or sort of reflecting also on the positive note that we ended the article on? What's the light at the end of the tunnel, if there is one?
Mansi, shall we just start a space race together?
That is Jana's unique sense of humor. You'll get used to it.
Okay, so several things. I think first of all, if you talk to somebody about the problems in the world, they will say, "Yeah, I don't watch the news anymore because it's only me. I can't do anything." And it always strikes me that if you then probe them further about what's the problem, they talk about Musk, they talk about Trump. It's a single person. It changes the entire world. So I think this whole dogma that the world is impossible to change as a single person is just proven in front of your eyes. This is not true. It can be changed by a single person. I think it's possible. So definitely. And in an open space where everything changes, you are free to change whatever you want to change. And the biggest mistake you can make is trying to cling on to the things that have changed already. And again, that's what we're doing. But there is a lot of things that you could do. And I would just say, do it. I don't think it's difficult, but it takes pain and it takes effort, and it's not what you're used to, so it's inconvenient. Yeah, but that's the inconvenient truth.
So that's where we're going to leave it today. Hopefully this conversation made you see something differently or think about something differently. That's exactly what we're going for. Next week, we're going to take another complex topic and try to see what an inversion could look like. Hope to see you there.